They called her cursed, broken, less than nothing. On the night when every wolf found their destiny, Naira Thorne knelt alone in the dark. No scent, no bond, no future. Just shame burning hotter than the dying candles around her. Then a crippled stranger limped from the shadows with an offer that smelled like desperation. Marriage without love, survival without hope. She should have refused, but the rejected have nothing left to lose. What Naira didn't know? The broken man hiding his limp was the most dangerous predator in the realm, and she was about to become something even he feared. Stay until the end to see how the girl they threw away became the queen they couldn't destroy. Like this video if you love a good revenge story, and comment what city you're watching from. The ceremony hall reeked of anticipation and expensive perfume, a combination that made Naira's stomach turn. She pressed herself against the cold stone wall in the back corner, trying to disappear into the shadows. Around her, the other Omegas preened and whispered, their skin glowing with sacred oils that were supposed to help alphas sense compatibility. Candles covered every surface, windowsills, tables, ledges, hundreds of flames dancing like they were excited for what was about to happen. Mira wished she could blow them all out. Did you see Callum Reeve during the procession? Mira, the baker's daughter, was practically vibrating. He looked directly at me. Right, at me. Everyone knows he's choosing Sarah, another girl said, not bothering to lower her voice. She's been compatible with him for weeks, her scent's already manifesting. Still. He looked. Naira's fingers dug into the rough fabric of her dress, plain gray cotton with a mended hem. It was the best thing she owned, which told you everything you needed to know about her place in the pack hierarchy. While the other Omegas wore silk and velvet, she wore something that looked like it had been rejected by the charity bin, because that's exactly where it had come from. The choosing ceremony happened once every 3 years, when the full moon reached its peak, and the old magic supposedly ran hottest through their blood. Tonight, alphas would claim their mates. Bonds would form that were supposed to last forever. Every Omega's worth would be measured and announced before the entire pack. It was the night Naira had been dreading since she turned 16 and realized something fundamental was wrong with her. I heard the Alpha Sovereign himself might show up, someone whispered, and the excited chatter increased to a dull roar. Naira had heard the rumors too. Kyle Draven, the mysterious ruler who governed from his fortress somewhere in the western mountains, might actually attend tonight. Nobody had seen him in years. Some said he was horribly disfigured from battle wounds. Others claimed he was dead and his advisors were running everything in secret, using his name like a puppet. None of it mattered to Naira, because tonight she would kneel in front of everyone and confirm what they already knew. She was defective, broken, wrong in some fundamental way that couldn't be fixed. Take your places. Elder Morvain's voice cracked through the chatter like a whip. The Alphas are entering. Show some dignity for the love of just line up properly. The Omegas scrambled into formation, creating a semicircle beneath the crystal chandelier that had probably cost more than Naira would earn in her entire lifetime. She took her spot at the far end, where the candlelight barely reached. At least in the shadows, people might not stare quite as obviously when nothing happened. When she failed. Again. The doors at the far end opened, and the Alphas entered. They moved with that particular swagger that came from knowing exactly who you were and never once questioning your value. Callum Reeve led them, tall, blonde, perfect jaw, the pack leader's son, and therefore destined for greatness. Dax Morthen followed, all scars and silent intensity. Even young Finn Ashwood, who couldn't have been more than 19, walked like he owned the ground beneath his feet. The ceremony had its rituals and formal words, but everyone knew the truth. When an Alpha and Omega were truly compatible, the bond announced itself. A scent would bloom, unique to each pairing, impossible to fake or force. The Alpha would approach, the Omega would accept or refuse. Simple, clean, ordained by nature itself. Elder Morvain raised her gnarled hands, and the hall fell into expectant silence. By the light of the full moon and the ancient blood that flows in our veins, we gather to witness the bonds that will strengthen our pack. Her voice had that flat quality of someone who'd given this exact speech a dozen times before and would give it a dozen more. Alphas, open your senses to what nature provides. Omegas, open your hearts to what nature intends. Let the old magic speak. The air seemed to thicken, becoming heavier somehow. Naira watched it happen like she was observing from underwater, everything muffled and distant and happening to someone else. Callum's nostrils flared. His head turned towards Sarah, who stood 3 spots down from Naira. The girl's face flushed deep red as her scent manifested into the room, something people would later describe as honey mixed with lightning, sweet but electric. Beautiful. Perfect. Everything a proper Omega scent should be. Callum crossed the space between them in 4 long strides. Sarah met him in the middle. Their hands touched, and the bond snapped into place with almost visible force, like 2 magnets finally allowed to connect. The watching crowd erupted in applause and cheers. Down the line it continued, each pairing met with celebration. Dax claimed Alara. Her scent was cinnamon and rain, earthy and warm. Finn claimed Mira, citrus and wood smoke, bright and grounding. Each successful bond was another confirmation that the world worked exactly as it should, that nature knew what it was doing, that everything was right and proper and good, until only Naira remained. Standing alone in her corner of shadow, hands clasped so tightly her fingernails drew crescent moons of blood in her palms. The silence changed, became awkward, heavy. Elder Morvain's mouth pinched like she'd bitten into rotten fruit. Are there any alphas who sense a bond with this Omega? Crickets would have been louder than the response she got. Anyone at all? One of the younger alphas, Marcus, Nira didn't know his name, took a half step forward, frowned, breathed deeply, then shook his head. I thought I sensed something, but no, there's nothing there. Nothing there. The words hung in the air like an execution sentence. Perhaps if she moved into better light, someone suggested from the crowd, trying to be helpful and making everything infinitely worse. Naira forced her legs to move, stepping into the full brightness of the chandelier. She felt like a specimen under glass, something strange and unfortunate being examined before disposal. Every eye in the hall was on her, measuring and finding her lacking. The alphas breathed in deeply, searching for any hint of compatibility, any trace of the scent that should be there. They found nothing, because there was nothing to find. Nira had known this would happen. Had known since she was 16, and her first heat arrived without producing the one thing that supposedly defined Omega identity. The pack healers had poked and prodded and run their tests. They'd confirmed she was biologically Omega. Her heats came regularly, her body responded to alpha pheromones the way it should. But the scent, that crucial element that allowed bonds to form, simply wasn't there. She was Omega in body but missing something essential in spirit. Broken, wrong, defective. This is unprecedented, Elder Morvain said, and Naira heard the unspoken words clearly and deeply unwelcome. Maybe she's not actually Omega, someone whispered. She has to be something. You can't just be nothing. My grandmother told stories about Omegas born without scent, said they were cursed by the old magic for sins in past lives. Or they're just mistakes, nature trying to correct itself. The whispers grew louder, less careful. People weren't even attempting to be subtle anymore. Why bother pretending she had feelings worth protecting? Nira kept her chin up through sheer stubbornness, but her throat was closing and her eyes were burning with tears she absolutely refused to shed in front of these people. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. Not here. Not now. This ceremony is concluded, Elder Morvain announced, relief bleeding through every syllable. The bonded pairs will proceed to the blessing chamber for... Wait! The voice came from the entrance, rough and quiet, but somehow cutting through every other sound in the hall. Everyone turned. A man stood in the doorway, backlit by the corridor torches. Tall but hunched, leaning heavily on a carved walking stick. His clothes were travel-worn, covered in road dust. His dark hair fell past his collar, unkempt and tangled. Even from a distance, Nira could see something was deeply wrong with how he moved, favoring his left side dramatically, his right leg dragging with each painful step as he entered the hall. "Who are you?" Elder Morvain demanded, drawing herself up to her full height. "This is a private ceremony. Outsiders are not permitted. My name is K.L. Draven." He took another labored step forward, breathing hard like the walk from the door was costing him everything. "And I'm here to claim an Omega." The hall exploded into chaos. K.L. Draven, the Alpha Sovereign, here, now. But looking like that, the rumors about his condition hadn't prepared Nira for the reality. His limp was so pronounced that each step looked like torture. His right shoulder sat noticeably lower than his left, suggesting old injuries that had healed badly or not at all. There was a faint tremor in his left hand that he tried to hide by gripping the walking stick. His breathing came shallow and labored, like damaged lungs struggling to get enough air. He looked like someone who'd been shattered and poorly reassembled by someone who didn't quite remember how people were supposed to work. There was no aura of power around him, no commanding alpha presence that made people instinctively bow. He just looked broken and tired and like he was about 5 years past when he should have retired somewhere quiet to die in peace. "You honor us with your presence, Alpha Sovereign." Elder Morvain recovered first, dropping into a bow so deep her forehead nearly touched her knees. The rest of the hall scrambled to follow suit. "However, I must inform you that the ceremony has concluded. All compatible Omegas have been claimed by—" "I'm not interested in the compatible ones." His voice was steady despite the labored breathing. His eyes swept the room with surprising sharpness, landing on Naira and staying there. "I'm claiming her." The silence that followed was so complete that Naira could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. Several people gasped. Someone dropped something that shattered on the stone floor. Elder Morvain's face went through several complicated expressions before settling on horrified confusion. "That Omega is—" The old woman searched visibly for diplomatic phrasing. "She's unclaimed for a reason, Alpha Sovereign. She produces no scent. There can be no bond between you. It would be, irregular." "I didn't ask if there was a bond possible." Kale's tone remained flat, almost bored. "I said I'm claiming her. Is there a problem with that?" "Well, no, of course not, but the traditions require—" "I don't care about your traditions." He started limping across the floor toward Naira with excruciating slowness. Each step looked like it might be his last. "Do you have the authority to officiate a claiming or not?" "I do, but—" "Then prepare the documents." He reached Naira and stopped, close enough that she could see the details up close, the network of old scars crossing his hands. The way his right shoulder didn't move properly when he breathed. A jagged scar cutting through his left eyebrow. Eyes so dark they looked black in the candlelight, but sharp. Far sharper than someone this damaged should possess. He smelled like pine smoke and leather, and something else she couldn't identify. Something that didn't quite match the broken body in front of her. "What's your name?" His voice was quieter now, meant only for her ears. "Naira." It came out steadier than she'd expected, given her heart was trying to punch its way out of her chest. "Naira Thorn. Naira Thorn." He tested the name slowly, like he was tasting something unfamiliar. "I'm going to offer you a choice, and I'll only make it once, so listen carefully. You can stay here, unclaimed, pitied, pushed to the margins of pack life until you die quietly of irrelevance. Or you can come with me. No bond, no love, no pretty lies about destiny, just a legal arrangement that serves both our purposes. What do you say?" It was possibly the least romantic proposal in the entire history of proposals. Naira looked at his scarred hands gripping that walking stick hard enough to turn the knuckles white. Looked at his damaged body that barely seemed functional. Looked at his face, which was hard and closed and gave away absolutely nothing about what he was actually thinking. Then she looked past him at the crowd watching this bizarre spectacle unfold. At Sarah and Alara and Mira, still glowing with the joy of their new bonds, looking at Naira with expressions of pure pity. At the pack members whispering behind their hands about how pathetic this all was. At Elder Morvain's face, which clearly communicated that this was the most irregular, embarrassing thing that had happened in her 40 years of conducting ceremonies. At the future stretching in front of her if she stayed, years of being the broken Omega, the cautionary tale, the proof that sometimes nature just made mistakes. "I accept," Naira said. The words came out before she'd consciously decided to say them. But once they were in the air floating between her and this strange, damaged man, she didn't take them back. Couldn't take them back. Didn't want to take them back. Kale nodded once, as if he'd expected nothing less. "Good. Elder, we'll sign the documents now. We're leaving tonight." "Tonight?" Elder Morvain's voice climbed an octave. "But Alpha Sovereign, there are rituals, preparations that must be made according to proper tradition. The blessing ceremony alone takes 3 days. I don't care about your rituals or your blessings or your traditions. Kyle's voice didn't rise, but it somehow filled the entire hall. Have the bonding documents ready in 1 hour. That's all the tradition I need. But this is highly irregular. 1 hour, Elder. Don't make me repeat myself. Something in his tone made even Elder Morvain snap her mouth shut. Despite his broken body and labored breathing, there was authority in his voice, the kind that came from someone who was used to being obeyed without question or delay. The next hour was complete chaos. Nira signed documents she barely read, her hand shaking so badly the first signature smeared into illegibility, and she had to do it again. Someone, she didn't even know who, brought a small canvas bag containing everything she owned, which wasn't much. 3 dresses, a spare pair of shoes, a hairbrush, a book she'd been reading. Her entire life fit into one small bag. That should probably have been more depressing than it was. Elder Morvain kept trying to insert traditional elements into the proceedings, lighting ceremonial candles and chanting blessings, and Kael kept shutting her down with flat, single-word responses. We should perform the unity ritual where, no, at least allow me to offer the blessing of no. The witnesses should formally acknowledge no, just the signatures, that's all. The newly bonded pairs watched from the side of the hall, their expressions ranging from confused to pitying. Sarah actually tried to catch Nira's eye, mouthing something that looked like, "Are you sure?" which somehow made everything worse, as if Nira needed reminding that this was the most desperate, pathetic choice possible. But desperate and pathetic was still better than staying. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only 45 minutes, it was done. The documents were signed, witnessed, sealed with official stamps. Nira Thorne and Kael Draven were legally married under pack law, bound by documents and ink if not by biology or destiny. "Come on," Kael said, already moving toward the door with that excruciating limp. "Carriage is waiting." Nira grabbed her pathetic little bag and followed him out of the ceremony hall into the cool night air. The moon hung huge and perfect overhead, mocking her with its fullness. This was supposed to be a magical night, a night of bonds and joy and destiny. Instead, she was leaving with a stranger who could barely walk. A black carriage waited in the courtyard, unmarked and anonymous. Plain black horses stamped impatiently in their harnesses. Kael hauled himself up onto the seat with visible effort and obvious pain, his breathing harsh. Then he extended a scarred hand to help Nira up. His grip was stronger than she'd expected. Steadier. The inside of the carriage was simple. Plain cushions, no decorations, everything functional rather than ornamental. As soon as the door closed and the carriage lurched into motion, Kael sank back against the seat with a long exhale that sounded like profound relief. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Nira said, "That was quite a performance back there." Kael's eyes opened slowly, fixing on her with sudden sharp intensity. "Was it? The limp gets worse when people are watching. When you signed the documents, you forgot about it twice and put weight on your bad leg. And that walking stick, you left it leaning against the table for a full 2 minutes and didn't seem to notice." His mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but something close to it. "Observant. I had nothing else to do but observe." Nira met his gaze steadily, refusing to look away. "You're not actually injured, are you? Not like you pretend to be. Very observant." This time, it was definitely almost a smile. "Most people only see what they expect to see. A limping man with a walking stick must be crippled. They don't look any deeper than that. So why the act? Because broken men aren't threatening. People underestimate them, dismiss them, talk freely around them because they don't seem dangerous." His dark eyes stayed locked on hers, which makes them very useful for moving through places where being recognized as what you actually are would get you killed or captured. And what are you actually? You'll see when we reach the Wraithwood. He closed his eyes again, conversation apparently over. "Get some rest. It's a 3-day journey." Nira looked out the window at the landscape rolling past, familiar hills gradually giving way to deeper forest, the moon painting everything in shades of silver and black. The packlands were disappearing behind them with every turn of the wheels. She'd just married a complete stranger who was definitely lying about being crippled, who was taking her to a forest that supposedly killed people who entered it, who'd made it crystal clear this arrangement was pure business transaction, nothing more. This was either the best decision she'd ever made, or it was going to get her killed. Possibly both. The carriage rolled on through the darkness, carrying them towards secrets that couldn't survive daylight and a forest that breathed like something alive. The carriage wheels hit a deep rut, jarring Naira awake from restless sleep. She dozed off at some point during the night, her head pressed uncomfortably against the cold window glass. Morning light filtered through increasingly dense trees, the branches overhead weaving together so tightly that the sky had nearly disappeared. The air inside the carriage felt heavy, damp, carrying the scent of earth and moss and something else she couldn't quite identify. Kael sat across from her in exactly the same position as before, eyes closed, breathing even and measured. But Naira had the distinct impression he wasn't actually sleeping, just resting while maintaining perfect awareness of everything around them, like a predator that never fully let its guard down. "Where are we?" Her voice came out scratchy and rough. "About 6 hours from the border of my territory." He didn't open his eyes. "There's water in the pack by your feet. Food too if you're hungry." Naira looked down and found a leather pack she hadn't noticed the night before. Inside was a water skin, strips of dried meat that actually looked edible, bread that was only slightly stale, and apples that appeared relatively fresh. She ate mechanically, her stomach reminding her she hadn't had a proper meal since before the ceremony. The ceremony. Was that really only yesterday? It felt like a lifetime ago. Outside the window, the forest was changing. The trees grew progressively larger, their trunks wider than the carriage itself, bark that had an odd silver-gray sheen in the dim light. And the silence was all wrong. No birdsong, no rustle of small animals in the undergrowth, no normal forest sounds at all, just heavy, watchful quiet that made the hair on Nira's arms stand up. "The Wraithwood starts about an hour from here," Kael said, finally opening his eyes. "You'll feel it when we cross the boundary. The air changes, becomes heavier, more present. Is it true what they say? That the forest kills people who enter it?" "Not exactly. It's more selective than that." He sat up straighter, and Naira noticed the limp from yesterday was already less pronounced in how he held himself. "The Wraithwood is old, older than any pack territory, older than most recorded history. It has its own consciousness, for lack of a better word. It decides who belongs and who doesn't." That's not ominous at all. Most people who enter without permission get turned around within an hour or two, end up walking in circles until they give up and leave. The ones who don't give up, he trailed off. "Let's just say the forest has ways of protecting itself. And I'm safe because I'm with you. You're safe because you're mine now. The forest knows me. It'll extend that recognition to you." His dark eyes fixed on her. "But don't wander off alone. Not until the Wraithwood decides whether it accepts you." The way he said "mine" sent an odd shiver down her spine. Not quite fear, not quite anything else she could name. They stopped once more before reaching the forest proper, at a rundown inn that looked like it was held together by prayers and stubbornness. The building sagged to one side, the sign out front so faded Nira couldn't read what it once said. Kael's limp returned the moment the carriage door opened, his entire demeanor shifting back into the damaged man persona. He struggled with the steps up to the inn's entrance, apologized to the innkeeper for being slow, needed visible help getting his bag up the narrow stairs to their room. The performance was flawless. Their room had 2 narrow beds separated by maybe 3 feet, a window that overlooked the increasingly dense forest, and not much else. The floorboards creaked ominously with every step. "Why do you keep doing it?" Naira asked once the door was closed and they were alone. "The performance, I mean. We're nowhere near your enemies out here." "Habit. And you never know who's watching or who they might report to." Kael lowered himself onto one of the beds with exaggerated care, maintaining the illusion even though they were alone. "The council has informants everywhere, innkeepers, merchants, travelers. One slip in the wrong place and the whole game falls apart." "The council," Naira repeated. "You mentioned them last night. Who are they exactly?" "Territorial oversight body. 10 members who supposedly maintain order and resolve disputes between pact territories." He said it with clear disdain. In reality, they're a group of power-hungry politicians who think they should control everything. They've been trying to get their hands on the Wraithwood for decades. Why? Because it's the largest unclaimed territory in the western reaches. Control the Wraithwood, and you control trade routes, water sources, access to the mountain passes, plus the forest itself has resources they want to exploit. His jaw tightened. They've been claiming I'm unfit to rule, that I'm violating succession protocols, that my territory should be placed under their management. Are you violating protocols? According to their interpretation of the old laws, yes. A sovereign is supposed to have a recognized mate, someone whose bond is visible and verifiable. He looked at her directly. That's where you come in. You're my proof of compliance, my legal technicality. And if they don't accept it, then things get complicated, potentially violent. He said it matter-of-factly, like discussing the weather. But having documentation buys us time, makes it harder for them to move against me openly. Naira processed this, trying to understand exactly what she'd gotten herself into. So I'm basically a political shield. You're helping yourself too. What kind of life would you have had back in that pack? He wasn't wrong. The best she could have hoped for was eventually being married off to some older widower who needed a housekeeper and didn't care about romantic bonds. Years of being the broken omega, always slightly outside every social circle, tolerated but never truly accepted. A lifetime of pitying looks and whispered conversations that stopped when she entered a room. This was better, probably. Maybe. That evening, she caught him again. Kale stood by the window, supposedly watching the darkening forest, but putting full weight on his bad leg. Both shoulders were level. No tremor in his hands, he stood perfectly straight and balanced, the walking stick leaning forgotten against the wall 5 feet away. "You're doing it again," Nira said from her bed, "forgetting which parts are supposed to hurt." For a moment, Kale froze. Then he turned slowly, and the transformation happened right before her eyes. The careful tension of maintaining an injury simply vanished like smoke. His posture straightened completely, his weight distributed evenly across both legs. The subtle weakness in his right shoulder disappeared. Even his breathing changed, deeper, stronger, more controlled. In the space of a heartbeat, he went from damaged to dangerous. "You're right," he said, and his voice was different too, clearer, stronger, carrying an authority the broken man persona completely lacked. "The injury is completely fake, all of it. A mask I've worn for so long, sometimes I almost forget it's not real." He crossed the small room with fluid, powerful grace. Nothing like the painful, limping struggle from earlier. Stopped close enough that Nira had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact, suddenly very aware of how much larger he was without the illusion of weakness. Up close like this, without the performance, he was genuinely intimidating. Taller than she'd realized, easily 6.5 feet, broader through the chest and shoulders. His body moved with the coiled readiness of a predator, every muscle under perfect control. The scars on his hands and face weren't marks of weakness, but evidence of survival through countless fights. "Why tell me the truth?" Naira asked, holding her ground, even though her instincts were screaming at her to back away from this apex predator wearing human skin. "You could have kept pretending, because you already figured it out. Your observation skills are better than 90% of people I meet." His dark eyes studied her face. "And because once we cross into my territory tomorrow, the mask comes off permanently. I need you to understand that the man you married, the broken alpha who limped into your ceremony hall, and the man who actually rules the Wraithwood are not even remotely the same person. Who are you really then? Someone who learned early that showing weakness is often the best armor. Someone who survived by making his enemies underestimate him until it was too late for them to realize their mistake." The ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Someone who's been playing a very long game and is finally reaching the end game." "And I'm part of that end game?" "You're a piece on his board, yes, but a willing one, which makes all the difference." He stepped back, giving her space to breathe again. "A mate who can't form a traditional bond means no emotional vulnerability, no leverage anyone can use against me. Just a legal arrangement that satisfies the old laws without creating new weaknesses. It's perfect, actually. Glad my defectiveness is so useful." "You're not defective. You're exactly what I needed." He moved back to the window, and Nira saw him consciously putting the limp back on, rolling his right shoulder forward, adding that slight tremor to his left hand. Watching him reconstruct the false identity was somehow more unsettling than seeing it drop. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow you'll see what I really am. Try not to be too shocked." That night, Naira lay awake for hours, listening to Kale's breathing from the other bed and trying to process everything. The man was a consummate liar and actor, capable of fooling entire rooms full of people without ever breaking character. He'd built an entire false identity, complete with physical symptoms and mannerisms, and had maintained it for years, long enough that people believed it without question. Someone with that much control, that much deceptive capability, should terrify her. But the strange thing was, she felt oddly safe. He could have kept lying to her, could have maintained the performance indefinitely. Instead, he'd chosen honesty when she'd pushed, which suggested he valued truth, or at least recognized when it was pointless to keep up pretenses. That had to count for something. Didn't it? She finally fell asleep as the first hints of dawn touched the sky, exhaustion overriding her racing thoughts. They reached the Wraithwood's boundary just after noon the next day. The carriage driver, who'd been completely silent for the entire 3-day journey, finally spoke as he pulled the horses to a complete stop. "This is as far as I go." His voice actually shook. "Won't pass the markers. Not for any amount of money you could offer." Nira looked where he pointed and saw carved stones set into the ground on either side of the narrow path. They were covered in symbols she didn't recognize, not pack script or any written language she'd ever seen. The markings seemed to shimmer slightly in the filtered sunlight, like they were carved from something other than ordinary stone. "We walk from here," Kyle said, climbing down from the carriage. The limp was still present, but noticeably lighter now, like he was gradually allowing it to fade as they got closer to his territory. Naira grabbed her pitifully small bag, everything she owned fitting into one canvas sack, and followed. The driver didn't even wait for them to fully clear the path before he was turning the carriage around with almost panicked haste, heading back the way they'd come at a pace that suggested pursuit by demons. "Friendly fellow," Naira muttered, watching him disappear around a bend. "Most people won't willingly enter the Wraithwood. The forest has a reputation, and reputations like that don't form without reason." Kyle adjusted a pack on his shoulders. When had he gotten that? She hadn't seen him carrying anything. Those who do enter against the forest will often don't come back out, at least not unchanged. "That's comforting. You're safe because you're with me. The Wraithwood knows me, recognizes me as part of itself in a way." He started walking toward the markers. "Just stay close and don't wander off for any reason. The forest plays tricks on people it doesn't recognize or approve of." "What kind of tricks?" "The kind where you think you're walking in a straight line, but you're actually going in circles. Or you follow what looks like a clear path and end up somewhere completely different from where you intended. Time works strangely here too. People have entered thinking they'd be gone for hours and emerged days later with no memory of where the time went." He glanced back at her. "The Wraithwood is alive in ways most forests aren't, and it has very strong opinions about who belongs here." They crossed between the boundary markers, and Naira immediately understood what Kyle meant about feeling the difference. The air changed the moment they passed the stones, became heavier, more substantial, like it had actual weight pressing against her skin. The temperature dropped at least 10 degrees despite the afternoon sun, and the silence intensified into something that felt less like absence of sound and more like active, concentrated attention. The forest was watching them, not threatening exactly, but intensely aware, assessing, judging whether they belonged or should be expelled. Nira's skin prickled with the sensation of unseen eyes tracking their every movement. "I feel it," she whispered, not sure why she was whispering except that raising her voice felt dangerously wrong. "The watching. Good. That means you're sensitive to it, which is actually a good sign." Kale's limp was almost completely gone now, his movements becoming more fluid and confident with each step deeper into the forest. Most people don't notice until the forest actively moves against them. You feeling it, this clearly suggests it's considering you rather than rejecting you outright. The trees grew progressively stranger as they walked deeper. The trunks expanded to impossible sizes, so massive that Naira couldn't have circled them even if a dozen people joined hands. The bark had that odd silver-gray sheen she'd noticed earlier, but up close she could see it seemed to pulse very slightly, like slow breathing. The texture was wrong too, simultaneously rough like normal bark, but also smooth and almost warm to the touch when she brushed against one in passing. Roots broke through the forest floor in intricate, almost geometric patterns that looked too deliberate to be natural. They wove over and under each other in ways that reminded Naira of the symbol-covered stones at the boundary, like the trees were writing something in a language older than words. And everywhere, that overwhelming sensation of being observed by something vast and ancient and utterly alien to human understanding. A rustling in the thick undergrowth to their right made Naira freeze, her heart jumping straight into her throat. 3 wolves emerged from between the massive trees, but calling them wolves felt inadequate. They were enormous, easily twice the size of any wolf Naira had ever seen, standing nearly as tall as her waist at the shoulder. Their fur was that same silver gray as the tree bark, seeming to shimmer and shift in the dim forest light. And their eyes held intelligence that was distinctly, unsettlingly unnatural. They watched Naira with assessment that felt far too human, too calculating, too aware. She waited for them to attack, muscles tensing for flight, even though she knew running was pointless. Instead, the 3 massive wolves approached Kael directly and dropped to their bellies in obvious, complete submission, tails wagging slightly, ears back in postures of respect and acknowledgement. "Good to see you all too," Kael said warmly, reaching down to scratch one behind the ears exactly like it was an oversized pet dog instead of a creature that could easily tear out his throat. "Everything been quiet while I was gone? No trouble?" The wolf made a sound, not quite a bark, not quite a growl, but something in between, that was somehow unmistakably affirmative, like it had answered a direct question with yes. "I'm sorry," Nira said faintly. "Did that wolf just answer you, with actual understanding?" "They're not regular wolves. The Wraithwood has its own pack, shifters, not animals. They can speak human language if they choose to, though most prefer wolf form for day-to-day life." Kael straightened, and the 3 wolves immediately fell into formation around them like trained guards. "They recognize you as being under my protection. You're completely safe with them." "Shifters," Naira repeated, her mind struggling to process. "Like in the old stories? But I thought they were extinct." "That's what the Council wants everyone to believe. Easier to hunt something when people think it doesn't exist anymore." His expression darkened briefly. "My people are pure shifter bloodlines. We can change forms at will, not just during the full moon like pack wolves. Different magic, different rules, different capabilities entirely." They continued walking, the 3 massive wolves pacing alongside them as escorts. Naira's mind spun with implications. Shifters were supposed to have been wiped out generations ago during something called the Purge, a systematic campaign to eliminate bloodlines that carried too much power. Everyone knew the stories. The old families that had been hunted down and destroyed. The few survivors who'd gone into hiding so deep they'd become legends and myths. If Kael's people were descendants of those survivors. "How many of you are there?" she asked. "In the Wraithwood?" "About 40 permanent residents. Maybe 60 if you count the ones who come and go for various reasons. Trade, scouting, maintaining connections with the outside world." Kael navigated around a massive root system without breaking stride. "We're what's left of several bloodlines that managed to survive by hiding here. The forest protects us in exchange for us protecting it. From what? From people who want to exploit it. Cut down the old trees, mine the resources, turn it into just another territory under council management." His voice carried quiet fury. "The Wraithwood is sacred ground, the last truly wild place in the Western Territories, and I'll be damned before I let them destroy it." Before Naira could ask more questions, the trees opened up ahead into a large clearing. A compound sprawled across the space, built so seamlessly into the natural landscape that Naira almost missed it at first glance. Low buildings made of dark wood and gray stone seemed to grow directly out of the earth itself, their walls incorporating living trees, their roofs covered in moss and vegetation. The entire settlement was surrounded by walls, but not normal constructed walls. These looked like the trees themselves had simply decided to stand in defensive formation, their trunks and branches interweaving into living barriers. Smoke rose from several chimneys, carrying the scent of cooking fires and wood smoke. Voices carried on the wind, laughter, conversation, the sounds of normal daily life. Somewhere, someone was singing, and everywhere, absolutely everywhere, there were wolves, dozens of them, moving through the compound space with clear purpose and obvious comfort, some in full wolf form, others in human shape, still others in various stages between, bodies blurring and reforming in ways that should have been biologically impossible but were somehow happening right in front of her. The transformation process was deeply unsettling to watch, bones reshaping under skin, fur sprouting or disappearing, bodies expanding or contracting. Within the space of maybe 5 seconds, a person would become a wolf, or vice versa, and they'd continue whatever they'd been doing without even pausing. "Welcome to the Wraithwood," Kael said quietly. "Your new home." A woman emerged from one of the larger central buildings, and Naira immediately understood this was someone important. She was tall, nearly 6 feet, and built like violence-made flesh, heavy muscles under scarred skin, arms marked with the evidence of countless fights. A face that promised swift retribution to anyone stupid enough to cross her. She moved with deadly, economical grace that spoke of decades of combat experience. Her eyes, pale gold and distinctly non-human, tracked to Kael first, then slid to Naira with undisguised, calculating assessment. "Boss," she said, "you actually brought her. Vara, meet Naira Thorne, my wife." Kael's voice held a thread of amusement. "Naira, this is Vara, my second-in-command and the person who actually keeps this place running when I'm not here." Vara's eyebrows climbed impressively high. "The one with no scent." "That's her." "Huh. Interesting." Vara circled Naira once, slow and deliberate, like she was evaluating a piece of questionable merchandise. "She's got spine, at least. Didn't faint or scream when the wolves showed up. Most outsiders lose their minds the first time they see someone shift. Had one guy actually throw up." "I'm standing right here," Naira said, finding her voice. Yeah, I noticed." Vara's grin showed entirely too many teeth to be friendly. "You'll do, I think. Might actually survive here if you don't do anything monumentally stupid. Come on, I'll show you where you're staying." "Vara," Kael said quietly, but with clear authority. "Be nice to her." "I'm always nice. It's literally my most defining and endearing quality. Everyone says so." She led Naira toward a cabin at the compound's edge, while Kael headed in the opposite direction, immediately surrounded by people wanting his attention and guidance. Naira glanced back once and saw him moving with complete freedom now. No limp, no hesitation, no weakness at all. Just raw, undisguised power and absolute authority. The real Kael Draven. And she'd just legally bound herself to him for life without having any real idea who or what he actually was. The cabin Vara showed her was nicer than any place Naira had ever lived in her entire life. Real wooden furniture that looked hand-carved by someone with actual skill. A bed with thick furs piled on it. A table and 2 chairs. Shelves built seamlessly into the walls. A stone fireplace already burning cheerfully, filling the space with warmth and the pleasant scent of burning cedar. Windows that looked out into the forest's perpetual shadows, but somehow didn't feel threatening from inside. "Kael's quarters are across the yard," Vara said, leaning casually against the doorframe. "You'll have your own private space. He's not the type to force anything, in case you were worried about that aspect of things." "That's good to know, but don't get too comfortable thinking this is going to be easy." Vara's expression turned serious. "People here are going to test you. Hard. You're an outsider, a pack wolf in a shifter compound, and supposedly mated to the most powerful person in the entire territory, except everyone knows there's no real bond between you two. What happens if I fail their tests? Then you don't belong here and you leave. Simple as that." Vara pushed off the doorframe, preparing to go. "Look, I'll be straight with you because I don't believe in dancing around things. We can't afford dead weight here. Can't afford someone who's going to crack under pressure or fold when things get dangerous. This place, what we're building, what we're protecting, it matters. People's actual lives depend on everyone pulling their weight and doing their part." "I understand." "Do you?" "Because I don't think you fully grasp what you've walked into yet." Vara stepped closer, her voice dropping. "The council wants Kael gone. They want this territory under their control so they can exploit it, and they'll use any excuse they can find, including a questionable marriage to an Omega with no bond, to justify moving against us with force. You're not just Kael's legal wife. You're a potential vulnerability, a crack in his armor they can exploit to bring everything down." The words hit Naira like cold water, washing away any remaining illusions about what she'd gotten into. "What do you need from me?" she asked. "Prove you're not a liability. Learn to fight, learn our ways, show everyone you can hold your own, and contribute something valuable." Vara headed for the door. "First test starts tomorrow at dawn. Combat training in the yard. Don't be late. And for the love of everything, don't show up wearing that dress." She left, and Naira sank onto the impossibly comfortable bed, suddenly exhausted down to her bones. 3 days ago, she'd been the rejected Omega kneeling alone in the ceremony hall, drowning in shame. Now she was in a forest full of ancient magic and shapeshifters, married to someone who wore lies like a second skin, surrounded by people who saw her as a problem that needed immediate solving or eliminating. She should be absolutely terrified. Instead, she felt a small, stubborn spark of something that might have been determination igniting in her chest. They thought she was weak, a liability, dead weight? Fine. She'd prove every single one of them wrong. Starting tomorrow at dawn. Dawn came too early and far too cold. Nira forced herself out of the warm bed, every muscle in her body protesting the movement. The previous day's training had left her with bruises on top of bruises, each one a vivid reminder of exactly how inadequate she was at combat. Someone had left fresh clothes outside her door while she slept, fitted leather pants that actually looked like they might survive a fight, a tunic made from material that was both flexible and reinforced, boots that were worn but sturdy and clearly meant for serious work. She dressed quickly in the pre-dawn darkness, fingers clumsy and stiff from cold and exhaustion. Her reflection in the small mirror showed someone she barely recognized. Hair tangled, dark circles under her eyes, a fresh bruise blooming along her jawline from where she'd failed to block one of Vera's strikes yesterday. The compound was already stirring when she stepped outside into air so frigid it burned her lungs. Wolves moved between buildings in both forms, their breath creating clouds of mist in the dim light. Someone had started fires in the communal areas, orange flames flickering and dancing against the permanent twilight created by the forest canopy overhead. The smell of wood smoke and cooking food drifted on the morning air. Vora waited in the training yard, arms crossed over her chest, expression completely unreadable in the half-light. She'd traded yesterday's practical travel clothes for fitted leather armor that looked designed for serious combat, reinforced at the joints, scarred from previous battles, worn in the way that spoke of years of hard use. "You're 2 minutes early," Vera said without preamble. "That's good. Shows you're taking this seriously." She gestured at the weapons rack mounted against the wall of the training building. Swords, staffs, knives, and things Naira couldn't even identify hung in organized rows. "Pick something," Vera instructed. Nira approached the rack slowly, feeling the weight of Vera's assessment. "I don't know how to use any of these. Obviously, that's why we're training. But everyone has natural affinities, weapons that just feel right in your hand versus ones that feel wrong." Vera pulled a staff from the rack, spinning it casually. "Pick the one that feels least awkward. We'll work from there." Nira tested several options before settling on a simple wooden practice staff. It felt heavy but balanced, and at least she couldn't accidentally stab herself with it the way she might with a blade. Vara nodded approval and selected a matching staff for herself. "Good choice. Staff work builds fundamentals: balance, distance judgment, body mechanics. Master this and everything else gets easier." What followed was another systematically brutal session of learning exactly how much she didn't know. Vera moved like water and violence combined, her staff becoming a blur of motion that Naira's eyes could barely track. Each strike that connected, and most of them connected despite Naira's increasingly desperate attempts to block, left new bruises layering on top of yesterday's collection. The cold, hard ground was utterly unforgiving every single time Naira hit it, which was often. "Stop overthinking," Vera said, after putting Naira on her back for what felt like the dozenth time that morning. She extended a hand to help Naira up. "You're trying to think 3 moves ahead and analyze optimal responses. You're not experienced enough for that yet. In real combat, you have maybe half a second to react. Your body needs to know what to do before your brain finishes processing." "My body mostly wants to run away and hide under a rock," Naira gasped, accepting the hand up. "Then your body has excellent survival instincts." Vera's mouth twitched in something that might have been amusement. "But running isn't an option here. Can't run from the council, can't run from what's coming. So we train until fighting becomes instinct instead of thought." Again. They went again and again and again. By the time weak sunlight, what little of it managed to penetrate the dense forest canopy, reached something approximating midday, Naira was completely drenched in sweat despite the frigid temperature. Every muscle screamed in protest. Her hands were raw and blistered from gripping the staff. Her ribs ached from impacts she hadn't blocked fast enough. But she'd also managed to block 5 of Vera's strikes in a row without thinking about it. her body finally starting to remember the patterns. And she'd even landed one solid hit on Vera's shoulder that made the woman actually step back. Better, Vera admitted, and the single word of grudging approval felt like a victory parade. You're learning, slower than I'd prefer, but you're actually retaining the lessons instead of just panicking. Does that mean I passed some kind of test? It means you're not completely hopeless. There's a significant difference between those two states. Vera tossed her a water skin and a cloth to wipe down with. Eat something substantial, rest for exactly 1 hour, no more. Your muscles need recovery but not enough time to fully stiffen. Then report to the main supply building. Senna will show you what inventory work needs doing this afternoon. More exciting adventures in counting things? Mock it all you want, but supply management keeps everyone alive through winter. Run out of food or medicine because someone couldn't count properly, and people die. Simple as that. The days began to blur together after that, settling into a rhythm that was exhausting but strangely comforting in its predictability. Mornings meant combat training with Vera that left Naira progressively more bruised, but also progressively more competent. She was learning to read body language, to anticipate strikes, to move her feet properly instead of being a stationary target. Her blocks were getting faster, her counters were occasionally landing. She was still terrible by any objective measure, but she was measurably less terrible than when she'd started. Afternoons were spent working wherever extra hands were needed. Detailed inventory of supplies, kitchen duty preparing meals for 80 people, repairing equipment that had been damaged, helping with construction on a new storage building that the compound desperately needed. The work was endless and physically exhausting, but it also helped Naira learn the compound's rhythms, meet people beyond just Kael and Vara, start to feel marginally less like a complete outsider. Evenings, when she could keep her eyes open, she spent with Elder Torin in his cabin that smelled like old books and medicinal herbs. The ancient shifter seemed to have appointed himself her unofficial tutor in the history and politics she'd never learned growing up on the margins of pack life. The purge wasn't one event, he explained one evening, his wizened face illuminated by firelight. It was decades of systematic elimination. They called it necessary, claimed the old families were too dangerous and too powerful, that they threatened the natural order and stability of all territories. But the truth was considerably simpler and far uglier. The council was fundamentally afraid of power they couldn't control or exploit for their own benefit. What exactly happened to the survivors? Nira asked, genuinely curious. Most went into such deep hiding they essentially ceased to exist as far as the world was concerned. They sealed their power away so completely that detection became impossible. No magical signature, no abilities manifesting, nothing that would mark them as other than ordinary. Some, like us, fled to places where the land itself offers protection from outside interference. His pale, ancient eyes studied Naira with disconcerting intensity. You remind me very much of them, actually. I'm not from an old bloodline. I'm just defective Omega who couldn't produce a scent. Are you? Or is that simply what people assumed because they fundamentally couldn't understand what you actually are? He smiled at her obvious confusion. The old magic manifests in strange and unexpected ways, child, not always in the forms we've been taught to recognize or expect. The question lodged itself in Nira's mind like a splinter she couldn't quite remove, nagging at her during quiet moments. 2 weeks after her arrival, as Naira was finally starting to feel like maybe she could survive here, everything suddenly changed. She was helping Senna conduct detailed inventory in one of the storage buildings, counting sacks of grain and making notes on a slate when urgent shouting erupted from the direction of the main gate. They dropped what they were doing and ran outside to find the compound transforming into organized chaos, guards rushing to defensive positions, weapons being rapidly distributed from the armory, Kael striding toward the gate with Vara at his side, and authority radiating from every movement. A group of refugees huddled just inside the walls, and even from a distance, Naira could see they were in terrible condition. 12 people, ragged and exhausted to the point of collapse, several visibly injured with blood-stained bandages. The woman at the front had horrific burn scars covering half her face and neck, the tissue twisted and discolored. Her eyes held the hollow, haunted look of someone who'd witnessed far too much death and trauma. "Please," she was saying to the guards, her voice hoarse and desperate. "We heard that Kael Draven offers sanctuary to old blood. We need help desperately. They're hunting us. They won't stop hunting us." Kael reached the group, his presence causing the nervous chatter to fall silent. His eyes swept over the refugees with sharp, assessing attention to detail. Who specifically is hunting you? Is council hunters, professional trackers, and killers? The woman's voice cracked slightly. They've been following our trail for 3 weeks. We managed to lose them twice, but they always pick up the scent again. She swallowed hard, fighting for composure. We're old blood. Our seals broke spontaneously. They want us eliminated. Dead or captured for experimentation, we're not entirely sure which. A visible ripple of tension spread through the gathered compound members like a wave. Naira saw faces harden, saw hands move reflexively toward weapons, saw the shift from wary curiosity to protective anger. How many hunters are tracking you? Kyle asked, his voice calm but carrying an edge. Started with 8 trained professionals. We managed to kill 2 in an ambush near the Greystone River, but the remaining 6 are still actively following our trail, maybe a day behind us, maybe less if we left signs we don't know about. Let them in immediately, Kyle ordered without hesitation. Get them food, clean water, proper medical attention for their injuries. Vera, I want perimeter patrols tripled effective immediately. Eyes on every single approach route to this compound. As the refugees filed deeper into the compound, moving with the stumbling exhaustion of people at their absolute limit, Naira caught fragments of their whispered stories. Families murdered in coordinated midnight raids. Homes deliberately burned with people still inside. Years spent constantly running and hiding, always staying just one desperate step ahead of people who wanted them dead for the simple crime of existing with the wrong bloodline. One of the refugees was a boy who couldn't have been more than 14 years old, his left arm heavily bandaged and the cloth soaked through with blood that was clearly fresh. He briefly met Naira's eyes as he passed, and she saw terror so profound and visceral it made her chest physically ache with sympathetic pain. This is the 3rd refugee group in 2 months, Vera muttered to Kyle as the newcomers passed by them. Her voice was low, but Naira was close enough to hear. The council's getting significantly more aggressive, more open and blatant about the hunting, which means they're preparing for something considerably bigger than isolated eliminations. They wouldn't risk this kind of exposure and potential political backlash unless they had a comprehensive plan already in motion. Kale's jaw was tight with barely contained fury. Increase all security protocols immediately. I want this compound prepared and ready for prolonged siege if necessary. That night, Naira found herself completely unable to sleep despite her physical exhaustion. The refugees' stories circled endlessly in her mind. The casual brutality of it, the systematic and organized hunting, the fact that people were being murdered en masse simply for carrying bloodlines they hadn't chosen and couldn't change. She gave up on sleep around midnight and walked through the quiet compound toward Kael's headquarters. The building built into the massive ancient tree trunk at the compound's center still showed light through the windows despite the late hour. She knocked once, more as courtesy than request for permission, and entered without waiting for an actual response. Kael stood hunched over a large table absolutely covered in maps, documents, notes written in multiple scripts, and what looked like intelligence reports. He glanced up when she entered, and exhaustion was evident in every line of his face and the dark circles under his eyes. "Can't sleep either?" he asked without preamble. "Keep thinking about those people, about their stories, about how many others must be out there running for their lives right now." Nira moved closer to the table, studying the organized chaos of information spread across its surface. How long has this been happening at this scale? The hunting? Officially and on record, it never actually stopped after the original purge supposedly ended. The council just got considerably quieter and more selective about it, conducting operations that could be denied or explained away. He pointed to colored marks scattered across the largest map. These represent confirmed incidents in just the last year alone. Families completely eliminated. Individuals who simply disappeared without trace. Entire bloodlines methodically erased from existence. But why? What's the actual point of continuing this after all these decades? Control. Power. Systematic elimination of anything that threatens their authority. Kale's hands clenched into white-knuckled fists on the table's edge. The old bloodlines represent everything the council fundamentally cannot dominate, magic they don't understand and can't replicate, abilities that surpass their own, independence they can't crush through normal political means. As long as we exist, we're living proof that their authority isn't absolute and their power isn't unquestionable. So they're trying to finish what the original purge started generations ago. Exactly. And they're getting progressively bolder because they genuinely believe they're close to complete success, close to finally eliminating the last remnants of old blood entirely. Nira studied the maps more carefully, her eyes tracking the marked locations and dates. These attack locations, they're not random. They're moving in a deliberate pattern, a spiral pattern, getting progressively closer to the Wraithwood with each incident. You notice that detail too. Kael looked at her with something that might have been respect mixed with surprise. They're systematically testing our defenses, probing for exploitable weaknesses, gathering intelligence. Eventually, probably soon, they'll move against us with direct, overwhelming force. Can we actually defend against a serious assault? For a while, yes. We have defensible positions, trained fighters, the forest itself as an ally. But we can't hold out indefinitely against truly sustained assault from superior numbers. He straightened up, rolling his shoulders to relieve tension. They have numbers, extensive resources, official legal authority backing their actions, which is why we need to fundamentally change the game entirely before they force our hand. How do we do that? I'm still actively working on figuring out that specific part. Nira looked at the documents scattered across the table. Ancient laws, territorial agreements, historical precedents, procedural protocols spanning centuries. You mentioned before that the Council constantly uses the old laws to justify their actions and claim legitimacy. What if we found a way to use those exact same laws against them, turn their own weapons back on them? I've been trying exactly that for months. But the legal framework is incredibly complex, deliberately full of contradictions and loopholes. Finding the specific right leverage is like trying to find one particular grain of sand on an enormous beach. Then maybe you need someone who's exceptionally good at seeing patterns that others miss. Nira pulled a stack of densely written documents closer, squinting at the archaic script. Someone who spent their entire life being invisible and learned to observe absolutely everything as a survival mechanism. They worked together through the long night, poring over what felt like centuries of legal precedent and traditional law. Torin joined them somewhere around midnight, bringing his extensive knowledge of the oldest and most obscure texts. Vera appeared near dawn, carrying food and offering practical observations about how laws were actually enforced in reality versus how they appeared on paper. "Here," Nira said finally, as the first genuine daylight began filtering through the windows. Her eyes burned from reading by inadequate candlelight for hours. This section about formal succession challenges. It explicitly states that any territorial leader can be challenged on specific grounds, but the challenge must be witnessed by a formal gathering of equals, meaning other territorial leaders or their official designated representatives. "The Council's been publicly claiming I violated mate bond requirements," Kael said, following her logic. "But we have extensive documentation proving otherwise. Official documents, witnesses, everything required." She pointed to another passage in a different text. "And look at this clause here. If they issue a formal public challenge, they're legally required to prove their case in front of those same neutral witnesses according to extremely specific criteria. They can't just arbitrarily declare you unfit. They have to demonstrate it following established protocols." "Which means we could potentially force them to follow their own rules," Vera said slowly, understanding dawning. "Make everything public, make it formally official, make it completely impossible for them to simply eliminate you quietly without consequences." "It's incredibly risky," Torin warned seriously. "Gathering that many territorial leaders means exposing yourself to numerous potential enemies in one location, many of whom might prefer you dead. Everything's already incredibly risky at this point. The status quo is unsustainable." Kael studied the passages Nira had found with growing interest. "But this framework gives us a legitimate path forward, a way to force them to answer for their systematic actions in front of witnesses they absolutely cannot simply silence." "When would this happen?" Vara asked practically. "The summit, 6 weeks from today. Every territorial leader or their official representative is required to attend by ancient law that even the Council can't override." Kael's expression hardened with determination. "We'll bring all our evidence there. Force them to answer publicly for everything." "They'll absolutely try to stop us from reaching the summit alive," Nira pointed out. "Undoubtedly. Which is why we'll need to be extraordinarily careful about route planning and security." He looked at each of them in turn. "I need to be completely clear. This is going to become far more dangerous than it already is. People will likely die. When hasn't it been dangerous? Vera said bluntly. At least this way we're actively taking the fight to them instead of just waiting here to be systematically slaughtered. Over the following tense days, more refugees arrived in progressively smaller groups. The compound swelled from its original 40 residents to nearly 80 desperate people. Each new arrival brought essentially the same story. Professional hunters pursuing them, families destroyed by coordinated attacks, nowhere else to go that offered even theoretical safety. And with each arrival, the compound's internal tension increased dramatically. More mouths to feed from limited supplies, more vulnerable people to protect, more potential weak points for someone to crack under pressure or be turned into a traitor. Dren made his increasingly hostile views abundantly clear at dinner one evening, about a week after the first refugees arrived. "We fundamentally cannot keep taking in every single refugee who shows up at our gates," he said, loudly enough for half the crowded hall to hear clearly. "We don't have adequate resources, don't have sufficient space, and we definitely don't have the security capability to protect this many people if serious assault comes." "So what exactly are you suggesting?" Kael's voice was deceptively calm. "That we turn them away to be hunted down and systematically killed? I'm suggesting we focus on protecting the people who've been here from the beginning, who've earned their place through loyalty and contribution, instead of risking absolutely everything for complete strangers who might bring disaster down on all of us. These complete strangers are our people, old blood, just like most of us here. Their only crime is existing with the wrong heritage. Their crime is drawing dangerous attention directly to us." Dren's eyes flicked deliberately to Naira with obvious hostility. "Just like certain other highly questionable decisions that are actively putting every single one of us at serious risk." The implication was crystal clear and deliberate. Naira felt heat climb her neck, a mix of shame and anger burning in her chest. Kael stood with careful, controlled slowness. "You want to say something specific about my wife? Then say it clearly and directly instead of hiding behind implications." "Fine. I'll be direct." Dren stood too, openly defiant now. "Her presence here is a massive liability, a transparently fake mate with no actual bond who the council is already actively using as primary justification to move against us. Every single day she stays is another day we're critically vulnerable." "Careful, Dren." "Why?" "Because you'll do what you did last time. Physically throw me against a wall for daring to speak uncomfortable truth?" Dren's voice rose. "Someone needs to actually say this out loud. This marriage is an obvious sham, everyone here knows it, and maintaining the charade is going to get us all killed." Several people around the hall murmured agreement, the sound spreading like poison. Naira felt something crack open inside her chest. Shame and anger and accumulated frustration mixing into something that burned almost physically. "You're absolutely right," she said, standing up. Every eye in the entire hall turned to stare at her. "I have no scent, no bond. I'm not a shifter, not powerful, not particularly useful in combat, yet despite training. I'm exactly what you think I am. Someone who was rejected by her birth pack and desperate enough to accept literally any alternative offered." "Then leave," Dren said bluntly. "Save us all the trouble and danger." "No." The word came out harder and more forceful than Nira had intended, because, unlike you, I'm not interested in turning away people who desperately need help just because it's temporarily inconvenient or risky. These refugees you're complaining about? They're not strangers to me. They're exactly what I would have been if I'd manifested anything the council considered dangerous enough to hunt." "You didn't manifest anything at all. That's the entire fundamental point of the problem." "Maybe. Or maybe I just haven't figured out what I actually am yet." Nira felt something strange stirring deep under her skin, not quite power exactly, but potential waiting to become kinetic. "Either way, I'm staying, and if that's genuinely a problem for you, then challenge Kael properly according to protocols or shut up and accept it." The silence that followed was absolutely complete. Then Dren laughed, harsh, mocking, deliberately cruel. "You actually think you have the authority to tell me what to do? You're nothing, less than nothing. A broken Omega desperately playing at being important." "Enough." Kael's voice cut through the tension like a physical blade. "Dren, you're dismissed immediately. Get out of my sight before I do something we'll both seriously regret." "This is a catastrophic mistake," Dren said, but he was already backing toward the exit. You're all making a terrible mistake that will get everyone killed. He left, and slowly, gradually, conversation resumed. But Nira felt the weight of judgment and doubt still pressing down from all directions. She'd defended herself with words, but she'd also essentially confirmed what many people thought, that she was nothing special, just a desperate outsider taking up valuable space and resources. That took genuine courage, Vera said quietly as people filed out after the meal. Extremely stupid courage, but courage nonetheless. Felt more stupid than courageous. Those two qualities usually go together. Vera glanced at Kael, who was talking with Torin in low, urgent tones across the hall. For what it's worth, I think you might actually surprise people eventually, including yourself. Naira desperately wanted to believe that. But belief was extraordinarily hard when you'd spent your entire life being systematically told you were fundamentally, irreparably broken. 3 days before they were scheduled to leave for the summit, complete disaster struck without warning. Naira was working with Torin in his cluttered cabin, studying more of the complex old laws and trying to understand the intricate legal frameworks when alarm horns blasted from the northern perimeter. 3 short, urgent bursts that everyone had been trained meant imminent attack. They ran outside into organized chaos, guards rushing to predetermined defensive positions, shifters transforming mid-stride, becoming massive wolves that moved with supernatural speed, weapons being rapidly distributed from the armory stores. What's happening? Nira grabbed a passing guard's arm. Council forces, estimated at least 50 trained fighters, probably significantly more. They're not even attempting to hide their approach this time. Kael appeared, moving through the chaotic compound with absolute authority and confidence, efficiently directing defenses, organizing rapid responses, his voice carrying clear commands. He saw Naira and immediately changed course toward her. Get to the central building immediately. There's a secured room carved into the rock below ground. Take all the refugees and non-combatants there now. I can help somehow. You can help by staying alive and protected. Please, Naira, I need to focus entirely on defense, not constantly worry about where you are. His face showed real fear underneath the authoritative mask. You're a potential hostage, a massive vulnerability. I need you safe. She wanted desperately to argue, to insist she could contribute something. But looking at his face, the genuine terror mixing with determination, she understood. She was exactly what Dren had said, a liability in precisely the way that mattered most during actual combat. Okay, I'll go immediately. She helped frantically herd refugees and other non-combatants toward the secured room, a heavily reinforced space carved directly into living rock beneath the massive central tree. It was cramped and oppressively dark and smelled overwhelmingly like damp earth and concentrated fear. They waited there for what felt like endless hours while sounds of fighting filtered down through layers of stone above them. Shouting voices. The harsh clash of weapons meeting. Howls that sounded simultaneously human and not human at all. The woman with the terrible burn scars, Risa, Nira had learned her name was, sat against the rough wall with her eyes closed, breathing in careful, deliberately controlled patterns. First time experiencing this? She asked without opening her eyes. In an actual battle? Yes. It doesn't get easier with repetition, just more familiar and slightly less paralyzing. Risa's scarred face twisted into something that might have been intended as a smile. But at least here in this place, we're not just running. That's something meaningful. A massive explosion somewhere above them made everyone flinch violently. Dust and small rocks drifted down from the ceiling like deadly snow. Was that? Someone started. Magical ordnance, another refugee said grimly, clearly experienced. Council must have brought at least one trained combat caster with them. More waiting in the oppressive darkness. More muffled sounds of combat. Someone in the corner started crying quietly, trying to muffle the sound. The teenage boy named Jace with the injured arm was shaking so violently, his teeth literally chattered. Naira found herself moving almost unconsciously to sit beside him. Hey, what's your name again? Jace. I'm Naira. This is scary, isn't it? I don't want to die here. We just finally got somewhere that felt safe, and now... His voice broke completely. Kael won't let anything happen to us. He's been preparing for exactly this. Everyone always says things like that, right before they die horribly. Nira didn't have any good answer for that brutal honesty. So she just sat with him silently, letting him shake against her shoulder while above them the vicious battle raged on. Finally, after what felt like entire days but was probably only 3 or 4 actual hours, the sounds of fighting gradually faded into tense silence. Footsteps approached the secured room's entrance. Everyone tensed immediately. Makeshift weapons were drawn, knives, improvised clubs, anything available. The heavy door opened slowly. Vera stood there, absolutely covered in blood and breathing hard. It's finished. They're retreating. The relief was physically palpable. People hugged each other, cried, thanked gods they probably didn't actually believe in. Nira followed Vara up into the compound proper and stopped completely cold. The damage was absolutely extensive. One entire building had partially collapsed into rubble. Scorch marks blackened the ground in several locations. Bodies lay scattered across the compound, mostly council soldiers in their distinctive armor, but some of their own people too, unmoving in growing pools of blood. The wounded were being carried to the medical building, their groans and screams filling the air. And in the exact center of the training yard stood Kael, facing down a single man in tense confrontation. Theron Cade. The warlord looked like violence made flesh and given human form, extraordinarily tall, heavily scarred, built like a weapon designed specifically for killing. He held a blade that dripped fresh blood, his pale blue eyes cold and constantly assessing everything around him with predatory calculation. "This doesn't have to continue endlessly," Theron said. His voice was surprisingly soft, almost gentle. "Surrender yourself voluntarily for formal council judgment. Everyone else here goes free without further harm. You know I cannot possibly do that. Can't or won't." Both, obviously. Kael's hands were empty, but his entire posture screamed imminent violence. "You leave right now, this ends here. You stay even 1 minute longer, and I'll personally make absolutely certain the council deeply regrets sending you." Bold words from someone whose compound is literally half destroyed. "We're still standing, still functional. That's what actually matters." Theron studied him for a long, calculating moment. Then his pale eyes shifted to Nira, who'd moved closer without consciously realizing it. "The Omega," he said with sudden interest. "So that's what this is really about. Interesting choice of mate. She's not your concern. Everything that threatens council authority is explicitly my concern and responsibility." Theron took a deliberate step toward Nira. Kael moved to intercept, but Theron was impossibly, supernaturally fast. Suddenly, he was directly in front of Nira, his blood-slick blade pressed against her throat, hard enough to draw a thin line of blood. "Nobody move even slightly," he ordered the compound, "or I open her throat and she bleeds out in seconds." Nira felt cold steel biting into her skin, the razor-sharp edge already drawing that line of blood that trickled down her neck. Kael had frozen completely, his face gone absolutely blank. "Let her go immediately." "I don't think so. See, I was sent here to eliminate a problem, but I think we've just discovered something far more interesting and valuable." Theron's breath was hot against Nira's ear. "Do you know what you actually are, little Omega? What you're carrying inside you?" "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't you? Haven't you felt it stirring? That thing inside you that doesn't quite fit right, that feels like it's desperately trying to wake up from a very long sleep?" His blade pressed harder, drawing more blood. "There's a very specific reason the old bloodlines were hunted so ruthlessly. A reason that particular kind of power was supposed to be completely extinct. Because power like that fundamentally can't be controlled, can't be bargained with, can't be contained." Nira's heart was hammering so violently she thought it might literally burst from her chest. Under the overwhelming fear, something else was stirring, that strange sensation she'd felt occasionally before, like enormous potential waiting desperately to become kinetic energy. "And anything that cannot be controlled must be permanently eliminated," Theron finished coldly. The blade bit deeper into her throat, preparing for the killing stroke, and something inside Nira broke open like a dam, finally failing. Power surged through her entire body like lightning, finding ground after an eternity, searching. Ancient, absolutely furious, completely foreign, yet somehow intimately familiar at the deepest level. The air around them bent and shimmered with energy that had no name in any modern language. The massive ancient trees at the compound's edge began swaying despite perfectly still air, and somewhere deep in the forest, wolves started howling in voices that sounded almost like words in an unknown tongue. Nira's eyes snapped open, but she wasn't seeing the compound anymore. She was seeing everything, every person watching, their deepest fears and desperate hopes laid bare like open books she could read effortlessly. The council soldiers' corruption and greed. Theron's cold calculation mixed with sudden, startled fear. Kael's desperate hope and absolute terror intertwined. And deeper, stranger, the forest itself, vast and ancient and consciously aware, recognizing her as something it had been patiently waiting for across centuries, welcoming her as kin. "Stop!" Theron's voice cracked with genuine fear. "What is this?" But Naira wasn't listening to him anymore, because the power that had been locked inside her for her entire life, sealed away so completely she'd never even known it existed, was finally, irrevocably awake. And it had very strong opinions about men who put blades to her throat. The power that had exploded out of Nira didn't fade. It hung in the air like a living thing, pressing down on everyone in the compound with weight that felt almost physical. Theron's blade had clattered to the ground, his hands now clawing uselessly at his throat as if an invisible force was choking him. His pale eyes were wide with something beyond fear, recognition mixed with absolute terror. Naira felt the power flowing through her like a river that had finally found its course after being dammed for decades. It responded to her intentions with startling eagerness, shaping reality in ways that should have been impossible but somehow felt natural, correct, like this was what she'd always been meant to do. "Let him breathe," Kael said carefully from beside her. His voice was calm but carried an undercurrent of urgency. "Naira, you need to let him breathe." She hadn't realized she was doing it, hadn't consciously decided to choke Theron, but the moment Kael spoke, she understood. The power had responded to her fear and anger, had defended her without requiring conscious direction. She released him with a thought. Theron collapsed to his knees, gasping and coughing, one hand pressed to his throat. The confident, dangerous warrior from moments ago was gone, replaced by someone who looked genuinely shaken for perhaps the first time in his adult life. "Impossible," he rasped between coughs. "That bloodline is extinct. It has to be extinct. My grandfather made certain—" "Apparently your grandfather wasn't quite as thorough as he believed," Kael said coldly. He hadn't taken his eyes off Theron, his body coiled and ready to strike if the warlord made any threatening move. "Now get off my territory. Take your remaining forces and leave, while I'm still allowing you to." Theron climbed slowly to his feet, still breathing hard. He looked at Naira with an expression that mixed fear, calculation, and something that might have been bitter regret. The council will never accept this. What she is, what she carries, it's everything they've spent generations trying to eliminate. Then the council has a serious problem. "You don't understand what you're protecting. That power—" Theron gestured at Naira. "It's not just dangerous, it's destabilizing. It breaks the rules that keep our world functioning. The old families were hunted for good reasons." "The old families were hunted because people like your grandfather were afraid of them," Kael corrected. "There's a significant difference between dangerous and inconvenient to those in power. You're making a catastrophic mistake." "That's my decision to make." Theron stared at them both for a long moment, then signaled to his surviving soldiers. They began withdrawing in disciplined formation, carrying their wounded but leaving their dead behind. Before disappearing into the forest, Theron looked back one final time. "This changes everything," he said. "The council will come back with overwhelming force, and next time, I won't be the one leading them." Then he was gone, swallowed by the shadows between the ancient trees. The moment the council forces vanished from sight, Nira's legs gave out completely. Kael caught her before she hit the ground, his arms solid and reassuringly real. "I've got you. You're safe." "What?" Her voice came out as barely a whisper. "What was that? What just happened to me?" "Let's get you inside first. Then we'll figure it out together." He actually carried her like she weighed nothing, to his headquarters. Vara and Torin followed immediately, while others began the grim work of dealing with casualties and damage. The secured room was cleared and refugees were brought back up, but everyone Nira passed stared at her with expressions ranging from awe to fear to barely concealed hostility. Inside the headquarters, Kael set her carefully on a chair near the fire. Someone brought water and blankets. Naira's hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the cup. "Take your time," Torin said gently. The ancient shifter pulled up a chair across from her, his weathered face concerned but not afraid. You've just been through something profoundly traumatic and disorienting. Naira struggled to find words. I felt everything, everyone, like I could see inside their minds, their emotions, their intentions. And the forest, she looked at Torin. The forest was aware, conscious, and it recognized me as something familiar. Yes, Torin said simply. It would, because what you carry is ancient magic, the kind that predates pack hierarchies and council authority, and most of what we think we understand about how power works in this world. But I'm just an Omega with no scent. I'm defective. No. Kyle crouched in front of her chair so they were at eye level. You were sealed. Someone, probably your mother, maybe someone else in your bloodline, locked your power away so completely that even you didn't know it existed. It was a desperate survival measure from someone who understood exactly how dangerous the world would be if you were discovered. Sealed, Nira repeated. The word resonated with something deep inside her. Like the refugees mentioned, their seals breaking. Exactly like that, except your seal was apparently extraordinarily powerful and well-crafted. It should have lasted your entire lifetime. Torin leaned forward. The spiritual trial, when you and Kyle opened yourselves completely to each other, that kind of profound vulnerability and exposure was too much for even a masterwork seal to withstand. It cracked. And everything you've experienced since then has been the power slowly leaking out, building pressure, until Theron threatened your life, and it finally erupted completely. What am I? The question came out small and frightened. A will worker, Torin said. One of the rarest and most feared bloodlines from before the Purge. They were called Queenmakers in the oldest texts because they could command loyalty, enforce absolute truth, break through any deception, and impose their will on reality itself, not through physical force, but through sheer determination and power of intention. Nira's mind reeled. That's insane. That kind of power shouldn't exist. Most people agree with you, which is precisely why will workers were systematically hunted to extinction, or so everyone believed until about 5 minutes ago. Vera had been silent until now, leaning against the wall with her arms crossed. The question is what we do about it now. What do you mean? I mean, you just publicly manifested impossible power in front of dozens of witnesses, half of whom are refugees we barely know, and the other half, who already questioned your presence here. Vera's expression was grim. Word is going to spread faster than wildfire. The council will know what you are within days if they don't already, and they will come back with everything they have to eliminate you before you become too powerful to stop. So what are you suggesting? Kyle asked dangerously. That we send her away? I'm suggesting we need a comprehensive plan that accounts for the fact that we're now protecting quite possibly the single most valuable and threatened person in the entire territory. Vera pushed off the wall. The summit is still our best option. Force the council to answer publicly for their hunting campaigns. But now we're also bringing evidence of systematic attempts to eliminate the last will worker bloodline. That's genocide on a scale they can't explain away. If we can get there alive, Torin added. The journey to Summit Grounds is 4 days through territories where the council has significant influence. They'll have every incentive to stop us before we arrive. Then we make sure they can't. Kyle stood, his expression hardening with determination. We leave in 2 days. I'll contact every ally we have, arrange safe houses and backup routes. We'll travel with enough force that attacking us openly would require the kind of military mobilization they can't hide or justify. What about her? Vera gestured at Naira. She just manifested power she doesn't understand and can't control. What happens if she accidentally flattens half the summit because someone makes her angry? I won't, Naira started. You don't know that. None of us know that. Vera's tone wasn't unkind, just brutally practical. Power that's significant requires training, discipline, understanding. You've had it for approximately 20 minutes. Then we train her as much as possible in the next 2 days, Kyle said firmly. Torin, you'll work with her on understanding the basics, control, intent, managing emotional responses. It won't be enough, but it's better than nothing. Agreed. Torin nodded. We should start immediately. The longer the power runs wild without guidance, the more likely an accident becomes. The next 2 days were possibly the most intense and exhausting of Nira's entire life. Torin worked with her from early morning until late night, teaching her to recognize the power's signature, to feel it before it manifested, to shape her intentions clearly rather than letting fear or anger direct it unconsciously. The power responds to will, he explained for what felt like the 100th time. Your will. But will isn't just wanting something to happen. It's the absolute certainty that it will happen, combined with clear intention about exactly what you want to occur. Vague thoughts create vague results. Specific intentions create specific results. They practiced with small things first, moving objects without touching them, creating barriers of solidified air, sensing the emotions and surface thoughts of people around her without overwhelming herself with information. Don't force it, Torin instructed as Nira tried to lift a stone using pure will. You're trying to muscle the power into compliance. That's not how this works. You're not commanding the power. You're asking reality to adjust itself, and the power is facilitating that request. It took hours of frustrating failure before Nira managed to lift the stone even an inch. But when she finally did, when she felt that perfect alignment of intention and power and reality shifting, it was the most natural thing in the world. Good, Torin said with genuine approval. You're beginning to understand, now do it again, and keep doing it until your body remembers the feeling, even when your mind is panicked. Meanwhile, the compound prepared for both the journey and potential siege if they failed to return. Supplies were organized and distributed. Weapons were sharpened and distributed. Everyone who could fight received additional training. The refugees presented a particular challenge. Many were too injured or traumatized to fight effectively, but they also couldn't be left completely defenseless if the council attacked while the core leadership was gone. Risa, the woman with the burn scars, proved to be invaluable. She had experience with defensive strategies from years of running and hiding, and she organized the non-combatants into shifts for watch duty and basic defense. We've survived this long by being smart, not strong, she told the gathered refugees. If attack comes while they're gone, we hide in the secured room and we hold that position. No heroics, no attempts at glory, just survival. Nira watched her work and felt something like admiration. Risa had been through unimaginable trauma but remained functional, practical, focused on keeping people alive rather than drowning in despair. She's impressive, Nira said to Senna one evening as they helped inventory medical supplies. She's a survivor, real one, not just in name. Senna glanced at Risa across the room. Lost her entire family in a single night. Parents, 3 siblings, her mate, and 2 children. She was the only one who got away. Most people would have broken completely after that. She just got harder. The casual mention of such overwhelming loss made Nira's chest ache. How does she keep going? I asked her once. She said every day she survives is another day she denies the council their victory. That's enough purpose for her. On the second night, Kael found Nira alone outside her cabin, staring at the forest that had become oddly familiar despite its strangeness. Having second thoughts about the summit? He asked. About 100 different thoughts, actually, none of them particularly helpful. She looked at him. Theron was right, you know. What I am, what I can do, it's dangerous to everyone around me. So is he. So am I, for that matter. Power is always dangerous. That's not a reason to eliminate everyone who has it. He also said my existence breaks the rules that keep the world functioning. He said his grandfather used to say that. There's a difference between objective truth and propaganda that justifies genocide. Kael leaned against the cabin wall beside her. The real question is what you choose to do with the power. Use it to dominate and control others? Then yes, you become the monster they claim you are. Use it to protect people who can't protect themselves? You become something very different. You make it sound simple. It is simple, not easy, but simple. He was quiet for a moment. The spiritual trial, when we saw inside each other. I saw your entire life. Every moment of rejection, every time you were told you were worthless or broken. And I saw how you survived all of that without becoming cruel or bitter. You stayed kind despite having every reason not to. I'm not that kind. I'm angry most of the time. Anger at injustice isn't the same as cruelty. You're angry because you care about fairness and protecting vulnerable people. That's exactly the kind of person who should have power like yours. Nira wanted to believe him, wanted to believe she was somehow worthy of this impossible responsibility that had been thrust upon her. What if I lose control at the summit? What if I accidentally hurt people? Then we deal with it, together. Kael's hand found hers in the darkness. You're not alone in this, Nira. You never have to be alone again unless you choose to be. His hand was warm and calloused and solid, an anchor in the chaos her life had become. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything. For claiming me when no one else would, for protecting me, for believing I'm more than what I was told I am. You claimed yourself the moment you accepted my offer. I just gave you a different option." He squeezed her hand gently. "And you've already proven you're worth far more than even I initially recognized. You found the legal strategy that might actually save us. You've survived Vera's training and Torrens' lessons. You manifested impossible power and didn't immediately destroy everything around you. You're remarkable, whether you see it yet or not." Something warm bloomed in Nira's chest. Not romantic love exactly, but deep gratitude and affection, and the beginning of genuine trust. "The connection we felt during the trial," she said. "Is it still there?" "Yes. Stronger, actually, growing." He turned to face her properly. "I know this started as pure transaction, convenience, and mutual benefit, but somewhere along the way it became something more real. At least for me. For me, too." They stood there in the darkness, hands linked, while around them the ancient forest breathed and watched and approved. The journey to the summit began at dawn on the third day. 83 people total, every able-bodied fighter from the compound, plus the refugees who insisted on testifying, plus support personnel who couldn't be left behind safely. They moved in organized groups with scouts ahead and behind, taking routes that Kael's allies had confirmed as relatively secure. The first day passed without incident. They stopped at a safe house run by a shifter family who owed Kael old debts and were willing to harbor them despite the risk. The second day brought more tension as they moved through territories where council influence was stronger, but still no direct confrontation. On the third day, everything went wrong. They were passing through a narrow valley, necessary to reach the summit grounds, but tactically terrible for defense, when the trap sprang. Council forces emerged from concealed positions on both sides of the valley. Not 50 soldiers this time. Hundreds. A proper army mobilized with one purpose, preventing Kael's group from reaching the summit alive. "Defensive formation," Vera's voice rang out. "Protect the non-combatants." The fighters moved with practiced efficiency, creating a protective circle around the refugees and others who couldn't fight. Shifters transformed, becoming massive wolves ready for combat. Weapons were drawn. A man rode forward from the council lines. Not Theron this time, but someone Nira didn't recognize. Older, dressed in official council robes, radiating smug authority. "Kael Draven," he called out. "By order of the Territorial Council, you are commanded to surrender yourself and the anomaly you harbor for proper judgment. Comply, and your followers will be allowed to leave peacefully." "The summit is 2 hours from here," Kael called back. "We claim right of passage under ancient law. Interfering with summit attendance is a capital offense. Ancient laws require legitimate territorial leaders. The council has determined you are not legitimate and therefore have no summit rights." "The council doesn't have authority to make that determination unilaterally. That's literally the point of the summit. Nevertheless, you will surrender or we will take you by force." Kael looked at Vara, who gave the smallest nod. They'd known this was possible. Had planned for it as best they could. "We're not surrendering," Kael announced, "and you're not stopping us from reaching the summit, so either let us pass or start the fight you'll lose." The council official smiled coldly. "So be it." The battle that followed was chaos incarnate. Council forces attacked from multiple directions simultaneously. Steel clashed against steel, magic flared and crackled. Wolves tore into enemy lines while soldiers attempted to form defensive walls. Nira found herself in the center of the defensive circle with the other non-combatants, watching her people fight desperately against overwhelming numbers. She saw Vara taking on 3 opponents simultaneously with brutal efficiency. Saw Kael fighting like a demon unleashed, his speed and power beyond anything remotely normal. But they were outnumbered at least 3 to 1. Slowly, inevitably, the defensive circle contracted as fighters fell or were forced backward. "We can't hold this," Risa said beside her, her voice tight with fear. "There's too many." She was right. Nira could see it happening. Their people were skilled but simply didn't have the numbers. Within minutes, the defensive circle would collapse entirely and everyone would be slaughtered. The power inside her surged in response to her fear, pressing against her control like floodwater against a failing dam. "Don't!" Torin warned, somehow sensing what she was thinking. You're not ready. You'll lose control. We're losing anyway. Naira! But she was already reaching for the power, pulling it up from wherever it lived inside her. Torin had taught her the basics: intent and certainty, clear purpose. Will made manifest. She thought about what she wanted. Stop. Everyone stop fighting. Now. The power exploded outward in a wave of invisible force. Every single person in the valley froze mid-motion, swords raised but not falling, spells half-cast but not released. Wolves with jaws open but not biting. Hundreds of people suddenly unable to move anything except their eyes, all of them trapped in whatever position they'd been in when the power hit them. Complete, absolute silence fell over the valley. Nira stood in the center of the battlefield, the power flowing through her in a way that felt simultaneously terrifying and natural. She could feel everyone, their fear, their confusion, their desperate desire to move but absolute inability to do so. "Listen to me," she said, and her voice carried across the entire valley despite speaking at normal volume. "I don't want to hurt anyone. I don't want this fight, but I won't stand by while you slaughter people whose only crime is existing with the wrong bloodline." She walked forward slowly, moving between the frozen combatants. Council soldiers stared at her with undisguised terror. Her own people looked shocked, but hopeful. "You came here to stop us from reaching the summit," she continued, "to prevent us from presenting evidence of systematic hunting and genocide. But you've just proven exactly what we plan to testify about. The Council uses overwhelming force to silence anyone who challenges their authority." She reached the Council official, who demanded surrender. He couldn't move, couldn't speak, could only watch with wide, terrified eyes. "Here's what's going to happen," Naira said. "I'm going to release everyone. You're going to withdraw your forces immediately. And we're going to continue to the summit, where we will present evidence of everything the Council has done. You can try to stop us again if you want, but now you know exactly what I'm capable of when threatened." She paused, making sure he understood. "Or you can kill us all right here. But if you do that, I promise you my last act will be crushing every single person in this valley who chose to follow orders instead of doing what's right. Your choice." She released the power, and suddenly everyone could move again. For a long, tense moment, no one did anything. The Council official stared at her, clearly weighing options. Then slowly, he raised his hand in the signal to withdraw. "This isn't over," he said. "I know, but today you're letting us pass." The Council forces withdrew in organized ranks, leaving only Kael's group standing in the valley. As soon as they were gone, Naira's legs gave out for the second time in 3 days. This time it was Vara who caught her. That was incredibly stupid and incredibly brave. Did it work? We're alive and they're gone. So, yes, it worked. Vara helped her stand. But you also just demonstrated your power to hundreds of Council witnesses. They'll be absolutely terrified of you now. "Good," Nira said. "Let them be afraid for once." 2 hours later, they reached summit grounds just as the sun set. The ancient amphitheater was already filled with territorial leaders and their representatives. Hundreds of people gathered for the formal proceedings. News of the confrontation in the valley had apparently traveled fast because every eye turned to watch as Kael's group entered, especially focused on Naira. "They know what I am," she whispered to Kael. "Everyone knows, which means we need to act fast before the Council can spin the narrative." He straightened his shoulders. "Ready? No. But let's do this anyway." They walked together down the center aisle toward the speaking platform. The Council members sat in positions of honor, their faces carefully neutral but eyes calculating. This was it. The moment everything either changed or ended. Kael stepped onto the platform, his voice carrying across the entire amphitheater. "I bring formal grievance against the Territorial Council," he announced. "I accuse them of systematic genocide, of hunting and eliminating citizens whose only crime was carrying bloodlines they considered threatening, of violating every law and principle they claimed to uphold." The amphitheater erupted in noise, and Naira stood beside him, the last will-worker bloodline, living proof of everything he was claiming. The rejected Omega had become undeniable, and the whole world was watching. The compound celebrated through the night, but Naira felt no relief. She stood on the porch of her cabin watching flames dance in the fire pits, listening to fighters retell the story of how she'd frozen Theron mid-strike. Each retelling made it bigger, more dramatic. By morning, she'd probably be credited with single-handedly defeating an army. The truth was messier. She'd reacted on instinct, terrified Kyle would die, and somehow the power had responded. She still didn't understand how it worked or what its limits were. "You should be celebrating with them." Kale's voice came from the darkness beside her cabin. He'd been giving her space since the battle, but she'd felt his presence nearby, watching. "Should I? I just painted a target on all of us." The target was always there. He stepped into the light, and Naira saw fresh bandages on his arms, bruises darkening his jaw. "You just made them realize we could shoot back." "That's one way to put it." "What's wrong?" Naira turned to face him properly. "I froze a man, Kyle, took away his ability to control his own body with just a thought. That's—" She struggled for words. "That's the kind of power that gets people killed. The kind his grandfather spent decades hunting down." And maybe he was right to be afraid of it. Kyle was quiet for a moment, studying her face. "Do you know why my father refused the council's demands?" The subject changed through her. "Because he didn't want to give up territory? Because he believed power without accountability was corruption waiting to happen?" Kyle leaned against the porch railing. "The council wanted control for its own sake, wanted to expand, to dominate, to rule. My father wanted to protect what was his and leave everyone else alone." "What's your point?" "My point is that power itself isn't the problem. It's what you do with it." His eyes met hers. "You could have killed Theron today, could have crushed every council guard who threatened us. Instead, you stopped one man from cheating and sent them home with a warning. Because I was terrified of what would happen if I did more." Exactly. That fear, that awareness of what you could do, that's what makes you different from the people the Purge targeted. He straightened. Aldrich Cade didn't hunt down the old bloodlines because they were dangerous. He hunted them because they refused to submit to his authority. The ones who survived did it by hiding, by sealing their power away, by pretending to be nothing. Like my mother, like your mother. And now you're choosing something else. Not hiding, but not dominating either. You're just refusing to be erased. Naira looked out at the celebration, at people who'd been strangers weeks ago and were now depending on her to be something she barely understood. "I don't know how to be what they need. Neither did I when I took over. Still figuring it out most days." Kale's smile was tired. "But here's what I've learned. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to keep showing up." The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Naira was working with Elder Torin, attempting to lift 3 stones simultaneously and failing spectacularly, when Vara burst into the training area. "We've got incoming, North Road, small group, no weapons visible." "The council coming back already?" Kale asked, immediately alert. "No, these aren't council. They're—" Vara hesitated. "They're asking for Naira specifically." 20 minutes later, Naira stood at the compound's gate, staring at a group of 12 people who looked like they'd traveled hard and fast. Most were her age or younger, all bearing the exhausted, wary expressions of people who'd been running for a long time. The woman at the front, maybe 30, with copper-red hair and burn scars covering half her face, stepped forward. "You're Naira Thorne? The one who stopped Theron Cade?" "That's me. My name is Risa Vale. We heard what you did, that you have old blood, that you're not hiding anymore." She took a shaky breath. "We need your help." "Help with what?" "With surviving." They gathered in the main hall, and Risa's story spilled out in fragments held together by desperation. She'd been born into a family that knew their bloodline, knew what they carried, and had spent generations concealing it. Her grandmother had been sealed as a child, her mother too. But Risa's seal had broken during a traumatic fever when she was 16. "I manifested in front of witnesses," she said, staring at her scarred hands. "Fire manipulation. Not much, but enough that people noticed. Enough that someone reported it to the regional council. They sent hunters," a younger man added. His name was Jace, and he had the hollow look of someone who'd seen too much death. "Not officially, just mercenaries with a list of targets." "How many of you are there?" Kyle asked. "We're 23 when we started running 6 months ago. Now," Risa's voice broke. "Now it's just us." The silence that followed was heavy with grief. "The council's been doing this for years," another woman said. Her name was Mira, and her eyes held cold fury, quietly hunting down anyone who shows signs of old blood, calling it managing threats or maintaining stability. But it's just the purge happening slowly instead of all at once. Nira felt sick. How did you find us? Word travels, especially when someone publicly defies the warlord. Risa's burned face was earnest. We heard you have protection here, that you're not hiding. We thought... She swallowed hard. We thought maybe you'd help others who can't hide anymore. Every eye in the room turned to Nira. She looked at Kael, who gave her the smallest nod. Your choice. You can stay, Nira said. All of you. We'll figure out the rest. Risa's composure crumbled, tears tracking through the scarred tissue. Thank you. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Staying here means becoming part of this fight. The council knows about us now. They'll be back. I know, but at least we'll be fighting instead of just running. Over the following week, more arrived. Some came alone, others in small groups. Each had the same story. Old blood manifesting, hunters pursuing, nowhere else to go. Most were young, teenagers and 20-somethings who'd spent years suppressed and terrified. A few were older, people who'd managed to hide for decades before something broke their seal. The compound swelled from 40 residents to nearly 80. And with each arrival, the council's response became more aggressive. They're cutting off supply routes, Marcus reported during a council meeting, making it clear that anyone who trades with us will be blacklisted. We have enough stores for winter, Vera said. Barely. That's not the point. They're isolating us, making an example. Kael's jaw was tight. Showing other territories what happens when you defy them. So what do? Nira asked. We stop playing defense and start making them answer for what they've been doing. The plan was risky and probably insane, which seemed to be Kael's specialty. They would document everything, every survivor's story, every illegal hunt, every council-sanctioned murder. Then they'd present it at the summit, the annual gathering where all territorial leaders met to address grievances. The council can deny individual claims, Kael explained. But 80 witnesses, all with the same story? That's harder to dismiss. They'll just refuse to hear it, Dren said. He'd been subdued since his confrontation with Nira, but his tactical mind was still sharp. They can't. Summit rules require all grievances to be heard publicly. It's literally the point. Kael's smile was sharp. And if they try to shut us down, we'll have proof they're violating their own laws. This assumes we make it to the summit alive, Vera pointed out. Well, yes, there is that minor detail. The summit was 6 weeks away, held at neutral ground in the Central Territories. Getting there meant traveling through lands where the council's influence was strong, with 80 people who were being actively hunted. We'll need safe routes, Marcus said, studying maps, and allies willing to harbor us along the way. I might know some people, Senna offered quietly. My family has connections in the Eastern Territories. They're not fans of the council. Contact them, Kael ordered, discreetly. Nira watched the planning unfold, feeling the weight of responsibility settle deeper. These people were risking everything on her public defiance. If this failed... Stop spiraling, Vera appeared beside her. I can see it happening from here. I'm not... You're catastrophizing. It's written all over your face. Vera's tone was matter-of-fact. Look, you want to know what I think? Do I have a choice? No. I think you're so used to being told you're nothing that you still don't believe you're something, even after everything you've done. Vera gestured at the crowded hall. These people came here because of you. They're staying because of you. At some point, you're going to have to accept that you matter. I'm working on it. Work faster. We need you functional, not drowning in self-doubt. Brutal, but probably accurate. That night, Nira found herself back at the forest's edge, drawn by the sense of watching presence that was becoming familiar. The trees seemed to lean closer when she approached, their branches creating patterns that almost looked intentional. You feel it too. Elder Torin emerged from the shadows, moving with that eerie silence. Feel what? The forest's attention. It's been watching you since you arrived, but now... He touched one of the massive trunks, and the bark seemed to pulse under his hand. Now it's connected to you, responding to your presence. Why? Because the Wraithwood is old magic made manifest, and you carry old magic in your blood." He turned those ancient eyes on her. "The forest recognizes you as kin, as something that belongs here." "I'm not a tree." "No. But you're not purely human either. Not anymore." The seal kept more than power locked away. It kept you from understanding what you actually are. Which is? Still being determined, but whatever bloodline you carry, it's deeply connected to life itself. Growth, renewal, commanding living things. He smiled at her expression. "Why do you think the wolves submitted so easily? Why the trees respond? You're not forcing anything. They're recognizing authority that exists at a fundamental level." Naira looked at the forest, at the trees that seemed to watch her, at the wolves she could sense moving through the undergrowth, at the compound behind her full of people who needed her to be strong. "I don't know how to be what everyone needs me to be." "Then don't try. Just be what you are." "And what's that?" "Someone who survived being told she was nothing and decided to become everything they feared." The weeks before the summit passed in a blur of preparation and training. Risa and the other survivors shared their abilities: fire manipulation, enhanced senses, minor healing, even one woman who could see brief glimpses of possible futures. Nothing overwhelming by itself, but together they represented power the Council had spent decades trying to eliminate. Naira worked with each of them, learning their stories, understanding their fear and fury. And slowly, she began to see a pattern. They didn't hunt the strongest, she told Kael one evening. They hunted anyone who refused to submit. The ones who ran, who hid. They survived longer. The ones who stood their ground died first. That's how power maintains itself, through fear and selective elimination. But what if we're not afraid anymore? Then they'll have to actually fight us, which is why we need the summit to work. 2 days before they were scheduled to leave, everything went wrong. Theron Cade returned, not with an army this time, but alone, walking up to the compound's gate in broad daylight and requesting to speak with Kael. "It's a trap," Vera said immediately. "Obviously, but we still need to hear what he wants." They met in the training yard, neutral ground, heavily guarded. Theron looked worse than when he'd left, his face gaunt, new scars crossing his arms. "You look terrible," Kael observed. "The Council wasn't pleased with my failure." Theron's voice was flat. "I've been relieved of my command." "Sorry to hear it." "Don't be. I'm not." He turned to Naira. "You were right. What you said about the purge being a choice to eliminate threats rather than actual protection." "Having an epiphany?" "Researching family history, my grandfather's journals are illuminating and deeply disturbing." Theron's pale eyes held something that might have been shame. He didn't hunt the old bloodlines because they were dangerous. He hunted them because the Council promised him territory and power in exchange for eliminating their competition. The revelation hung in the air. "Why are you telling us this?" Kael asked. "Because the Council's planning something for the summit. I don't know details. They've cut me out, but I know it's bad. They're not going to let you present evidence." "Then we'll force them to." "You don't understand. They're planning to eliminate the problem permanently, all of you." Theron's jaw clenched. "I've done terrible things in my life. I've killed people who probably didn't deserve it, followed orders that sickened me, upheld a system I knew was corrupt. But I'm done. I'm done being their weapon." "What do you want from us?" Nira asked. "Nothing, I just—" He stopped, struggling with words. "I wanted you to know what's coming, and that for what it's worth, I'm sorry for everything." He turned to leave. "Wait," Nira said. "If you really want to help testify at the summit, tell them what you just told us." "They'll kill me." "Probably, but you said you were done being their weapon. Prove it." Theron stood frozen for a long moment, then nodded once. "I'll be there." After he left, chaos erupted. "We can't trust him," Dren argued. "This is obviously a setup." "Maybe, but what if it's not?" Nira countered. "What if he's telling the truth and the Council really is planning something?" "Then we're walking into a slaughter either way," Marcus said grimly. Kael had been silent, thinking. "We still go, but we bring everyone who can fight, and we prepare for the worst. That's suicide." "No, that's making them earn it." The journey to the summit took 4 days. They traveled in a convoy, 80 people moving through territories where half the population had been paid to report their location. Several times they encountered council patrols, But each time, Naira's presence at the front made them hesitate just long enough for the group to pass. The power was getting easier to control, more intuitive. She could feel it responding to her intentions, shaping reality in small ways, making paths clearer, encouraging hostile wolves to leave, even once causing a rock slide to block a road behind them, preventing pursuit. "You're getting stronger," Torn observed, "or the seal breaking more completely." "Both, probably, but you're also learning, growing into it." On the fourth day, they reached summit grounds, a massive natural amphitheater carved into a hillside, with stone seating and a central platform. Already hundreds of people had gathered, representatives from every territory. And at the center, the council waited. Counselor Thea stood with her colleagues, their faces carefully neutral. But Naira saw the calculation in their eyes, the way they tracked every person in her group. "They're counting us," Kael muttered, assessing the threat. "Good. Let them." The summit began at dawn the next day. Territorial disputes were heard first, border conflicts, trade disagreements, the usual political maneuvering. Nira sat through hours of it, her nerves winding tighter with each passing moment. Finally, as the sun reached its peak, Kael stood. "I bring grievance against the council itself." The amphitheater went silent. "That's highly irregular," Thea said, but Naira heard the tension in her voice. "But within summit law, you must hear me." "Very well. State your grievance," Kael's voice carried across the entire space. "I accuse the council of systematic murder, of hunting and eliminating citizens whose only crime was carrying bloodlines you found threatening, of violating the very laws you claim to uphold. That's a serious accusation. Do you have proof?" "I have witnesses, 80 of them, survivors of your purges." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. This wasn't standard summit business. This was explosive. "These are lies," another council member sputtered. "We have acted only to maintain, I can testify." Theron Cade's voice cut through the noise. He stood from where he'd been sitting in the crowd, and Naira saw shock register on Thea's face. "I can testify to council-sanctioned hunts, to kill orders given without trial, to targets eliminated simply for carrying old blood." The amphitheater erupted. "This is outrageous," Thea's composure cracked. "You can't seriously expect us to listen to witnesses?" Kael's smile was sharp. "That's literally summit law. Or are you saying you're above your own rules?" Thea's face went cold. She made a subtle gesture, and Nira saw guards moving into position around the amphitheater. "Kael," she said quietly, "they're not going to let this happen." "I know. Get ready." Risa stood, her scarred face defiant. "I want to testify about how council hunters killed my family. This summit is concluded," Thea announced. "All parties will—" "You can't conclude a summit before grievances are heard," Kael interrupted. "That's a violation of territorial law." "We can, when the grievance is treasonous." "Truth isn't treason." The guards were moving closer now, weapons drawn, and Nira felt the power surging in response to the threat, to the injustice of people being silenced again, to the council trying to erase them one more time. "Enough," she said, and though her voice was quiet, it carried. The air bent. Every guard froze mid-step, their bodies simply refusing to move forward. Naira stood, feeling the power flowing through her like a river that had finally found its course. This was what Torin meant, not forcing, but allowing, asking reality to adjust and having it obey because her will was aligned with something fundamental. "You're going to listen," she said, addressing Thea and the council. "You're going to hear every testimony, every story, every name of every person you've killed for the crime of existing." "You can't." "I can. Because, unlike you, I'm not afraid of the truth." She released the guards, but they didn't advance. Even they could feel what was happening, the shift in power, the moment when authority transferred from those who claimed it to those who earned it. "My name is Naira Thorn," she said, her voice carrying across the amphitheater. "I was told my whole life that I was nothing, defective, cursed. But I wasn't missing something. I was sealed, locked away because people like you decided I was too dangerous to exist." She walked down to the central platform, and the crowd parted automatically. "Well, the seal is broken, and I'm done hiding. We're all done hiding." She gestured to the survivors. These people represent bloodlines you've spent decades trying to eliminate, not because they were threats, but because they wouldn't submit to your control. This is manipulation, Thea said, but her voice wavered. You're using illegal magic to... I'm using my voice. The magic is just making sure you listen. One by one, the survivors stood and spoke. Risa told of her family's murder. Jace described watching his sister die protecting him. Mira recounted years of running, of seeing friends caught and killed. Each story was a hammer blow against the council's carefully maintained facade. And through it all, the amphitheater crowd listened, silent, horrified, understanding dawning. By the time the last witness finished, the sun was setting. Thea looked like she'd aged years. Even if these accounts are accurate, and I'm not conceding they are, what would you have us do? Apologize? Pay reparations? The old bloodlines were dangerous. No, Naira interrupted. You were afraid. There's a difference. Dangerous means actively threatening harm. We just existed. That's all most of us wanted, just to exist without being hunted. And now? What do you want now? Recognition. Official acknowledgement that the hunts were illegal. Protection for anyone carrying old blood. She took a breath. And council seats. Real representation, not token positions. That's impossible. Then things are going to get difficult, because we're not going away. And I'm not the only one whose seal is breaking. The truth of it settled over the crowd. This wasn't an isolated incident. This was the beginning of something larger. Thea exchanged looks with her fellow council members, silent communication passing between them. We need time to discuss. No. Decide now. Here. In front of everyone. The silence stretched impossibly long. Finally, another council member, an older man who'd been silent until now, stood. The council acknowledges errors in judgment were made. We agree to official recognition and protection. His voice was stiff, each word obviously costing him. And we will discuss representation options. It wasn't everything, but it was enough. The crowd erupted in noise, some cheering, others shouting protests, everyone reacting to the fact that something impossible had just happened. Nira returned to where Kale stood, her legs suddenly weak. You did it, he said quietly. We did it, all of us. That night, as they prepared to return home, Theron found Naira alone. I testified, he said, for whatever that's worth. It's worth a lot, actually. Thank you. Don't thank me. I'm just trying to be less of a monster. He looked out at the camp at the survivors celebrating. My grandfather would have tried to kill all of you. Probably. But you're not him. How do you know? Because he would never have admitted he was wrong. Theron nodded slowly, then walked away into the darkness. The journey home took 3 days, but it felt different. Lighter, somehow, despite the exhaustion. They'd won something real. Not complete victory, but acknowledgement, recognition, a foothold. As they crossed back into the Wraithwood, the forest seemed to welcome them, trees bending to create easier paths, wolves emerging to run alongside them like escorts. The compound was exactly as they'd left it, but returning felt like coming home rather than retreating to a fortress. That evening, Kael found Nira on her usual spot at the forest's edge. The council sent official documents, he said. Recognition of old bloodline rights, protection guarantees. It's not everything, but it's a start. Yes. He stood beside her, and Nira felt that connection between them. The one formed during the trial, strengthened through crisis, now simply part of who they were. You know what this means, right? You're going to be a symbol, a leader, whether you want it or not. I know. How do you feel about that? Nira thought about the girl who'd knelt alone in the ceremony hall, ashamed and small. Thought about the journey that had brought her here, to a forest that accepted her, people who needed her, power she was learning to wield with intention rather than fear. Terrified, she admitted, but also ready, I think. Good, because there's still work to do. The council gave ground, but they'll fight to get it back, and there will be others who need what we're building here. Then we keep building. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the forest breathe. There's one more thing, Kael said. The spiritual trial, what we found during it. That connection. I remember. It's still there. Growing, actually. His voice was careful. I'm not saying we need to define it or force it into being something it's not, but I want you to know I see you, really see you, and I choose to be here, with you. Nira felt something warm bloom in her chest. Not the bond magic of traditional mates, but something they'd built themselves from honesty and shared struggle. I choose this too, she said. The moon rose over the Wraithwood, painting everything in silver light, and Nira Thorne, the rejected Omega who'd been told she was nothing, stood at the edge of her territory beside the man who'd given her a chance, surrounded by people she'd helped save, carrying power that had once been feared. She wasn't cursed. She'd never been cursed. She'd just been sleeping, waiting for the right moment to wake up and show the world what she actually was. Not a mistake, not a defect, not something to be hidden or eliminated, just someone who'd survived being told she was powerless and decided to become the queen they'd feared all along. The forest whispered its approval, and in the compound behind her, survivors found safety, power, found purpose, and broken things began, slowly, imperfectly, to heal. The girl they'd rejected had found her place, and she was never letting anyone take it away again.